Hello and welcome to Code with JV, AI Snapshot number 3. On Monday, I had so many tabs in my browser, I was thinking maybe I'll do 2 episodes this week. But instead, I am going to shift the format up a little bit. I'll have one browser full of tabs for just a quick pass. I'll have another one for a bit of a deeper dive, and I'll also have some links which I'll just put in the description and not talk about. So try and strike a balance between breadth and brevity. Let me know what you think of the format. Can you copyright AI generated content? Well, the US Copyright Office says you cannot. There is an ongoing case between a comic book author and the Copyright Office. The Copyright Office says you can copyright the words you wrote. The comic book itself, you cannot copyright the images generated by an AI. If a human didn't make it, it is not copyrightable, is their reading of the law. Google's Bard can now write and execute code to answer questions. So they have an example here of reversing the word lollipop. If you have mathematical questions, it will start to write code to generate the answers and then answer it for you in that way. I think it's really interesting to see the big models starting to formally adopt different strategies for doing different tasks. Llama Adapter v2, you can drop in an image and get output, but they've got a lot going on under the hood about multilingual, multimodal language models, which can talk with other language models. This is kind of the tip of the iceberg, but they published a new demo this week. Who painted this image? What video game is this from? You can drag in videos, audio, images, and have a language model answer questions about them. So seeing big multimodal models is going to be an interesting thing. Facebook have come out with a text-to-music generator. Published on Hugging Space, you can play with a demo here. Usually it's got a bit of a queue, but if you type in something, you can drag in a sample track, hit generate, and it will make you 12 seconds of audio. And there's a bunch of examples you can do here. Some people are calling this the text-to-image moment for music. My 2 cents is that it's a very different domain, and I suspect the models and the people driving them will have an easier time making images they like to look at than they will have making audio they like to listen to. I just gut feeling this is more likely to stay in the world of audio experts and musicians, etc. But who knows? Really interesting article from interviewing Meredith Whitaker, who was an ex-ethics researcher at Google. A lot of good content in here, but the general vibe of it is, hey, all these people talking about AI safety, there's something in it for them. And there was a lovely quote when they were talking about the person who succeeded her was also an ethics person who also left the company. They're saying, if you listen to this person, you'd change your business model. But if you listen to the godfather of AI who comes out saying it's all really bad, you sit around a table in Davos and feel scared, which is, I think, a very interesting and somewhat cutting take on the AI safety stuff. This has been doing the rounds. Whether you agree with it or not, it's worth a read. Have a listen to the arguments and the positioning that the people who are like hell for leather AI, just go for it, forget about the safeguards. There's probably bits you agree with and there's probably bits you don't, but it's worth a read. On that topic, the UK government has got access to the big models as part of its safety stuff. So OpenAI and co are giving them their core foundational models so the UK government can evaluate them for safety. This image made me laugh. Let's just take both pills. Okay, that's the quick pass. Deeper dive topics. This is hot off the press. OpenAI have updated their API. They've made a bunch of changes. The big ones are a new context window for GPT 3.5. So their most popular API call, you can now hit a 16K context, which is about 20 pages of text. So if you're using their API, you can send in a lot more data and get a lot more data back from it. Another thing that they've introduced is this idea of function calling. So when you call the API, you can start to attach to it some specifications for functions that you can call. And when it gives you the output, it will give you a JSON object which you can use as parameters to pass into that function. They're making it easy for you as a developer to pass in text from your users and intercept some of their requests and say, you said send an email. Okay, if they say that, please use this function and output some JSON data which I can use to pass directly into my code to action sending an email or generate an image or search the web, etc. So they're very much leaning on this idea of integrating the intelligence from ChatGPT into multiple software projects. The examples they use are like sending emails, querying data. So a lot of the things that you may have seen with their fancy plugins, code interpreter and so on, are now in the hands of a developer where you can actually start to stitch that together yourself. which I think is got a huge amount of possibilities. They've got some new models which you can access by putting some different endpoints on them. They've also reduced their costs a little bit. So they're starting to do what Anthropic and Claude are doing, which is like, oh, we're going to charge you less for your input tokens than your output tokens. So if you're using these models to summarize large amounts of text, then that's few output tokens, and cheaper input tokens means it's just getting cheaper. My sense is that what we'll see a lot from OpenAI and others over the future is going to be, how do we get the cost of this stuff down? How do we get it more efficient to run these models so that they can become cheaper and more ubiquitously used? A lot of stuff going on. Check out that blog post. There was also a leak of possible futures. And this is basically someone digging around in some of their public code and looking at, oh, here's an interface that you've just left lying around, which has things like my profile, my files. The idea that you don't have to keep reminding ChatGPT who you are and what you care about. You can have that saved in a profile and load up a different profile for a different context. But also you can start to have files in there, and feels aligned with the push of OpenAI starting to offer enterprise-friendly services. And I've seen a bunch of people speculating that this is what the first offerings will start to look like for enterprise-type accounts. This was fascinating. So this is a researcher at Cornell, and essentially they did a study. It felt like a pretty thorough study on how biases in your AI writing assistants can shift your opinions without you being aware of it. So they did writing tasks for people, and some people, they would have AI assistants. Some people wouldn't. For some of the people with the AI assistants, they would have a biased AI who would talk about certain subjects with positive or negative comments. They didn't tell people all this stuff naturally. And they would give people writing tasks like, hey, write me a short summary on, is social media good for you or not? And they saw how people in these different categories responded and measured whether their articles were positive or friendly for social media. They also surveyed people afterwards to ask them, what is your opinion about this thing? And essentially, if you have a biased AI who thinks social media is awesome, you will write more positive things about it, even though you're just using it as a writing assistant rather than trying to tell you what to think. And you will also end up weeks later with more positive opinions yourself that social media is good. Imagine this at population scale dynamics. Everyone uses these assistants for writing. Imagine the big button in Google where it's just like, write this thing for me. If that has opinions about democracy or capitalism or all sorts of things which might be held in different regards in different parts of the world, people using these tools will actually shift their perception. I think that this question of bias in AI is just going to get bigger and bigger. There's another article I'll link below around Stable Diffusion and the bias it has about gender roles or race in certain things. You ask it for a CEO, guess if it's going to show you a white man or not, that kind of thing. And so these models, they're trained on biased data, they're going to have bias in them. And if that bias starts to be demonstrably affecting people's opinions at scale, makes sense, but it's also a little bit scary. Oh, here's something that dropped just after the snapshot from last week. Orca is a new model from Microsoft, 50 pages of research, and it is fascinating what they've done. Essentially, it is a small model, 13 billion parameters, and it's outperforming a lot of the other models in the big benchmarks they use for testing models. This is nearly a direct refutation of the paper I highlighted in last week's snapshot, along the lines of, if you train a model off the remnants of ChatGPT, it pretends to be good, or it looks good, but it isn't that good. Well, they're saying, well, if you tweak the outputs you get from ChatGPT, actually you can make it good and not just appear to be good. And they've had these 13 billion model really punching above its weight. What they did was they got ChatGPT 3.5 and 4 to answer a whole bunch of questions, but do things like explain it like I'm 5, or actually think out loud and show me the steps of your thinking. They used this thinking out loud training data at a massive scale. It's worth having a look through the paper. There are a bunch of things in here. This one here is really interesting, looking at how much data did they use for Alpaca, Vicuna, etc. Massive just amount of more. And so Microsoft, they've got some money. They just hit the API and got 5 million chunks of explain your thinking on these sorts of things. And it was a mix of ChatGPT and GPT-4. So they built up this very large data set, not just smaller ones. They also had this kind of thing, which was like, okay, ChatGPT, tell me how to solve this problem. Tell me how to get the right answer. It's like they were using the big, powerful models as teachers and generating all this content designed to teach a smaller model how to do what they can do. Not surprisingly, GPT-4 was better at it than ChatGPT, but they found that if they just trained it on GPT-4's data, it wasn't as good as when they trained it on GPT-3.5's and then 4's. It's like you learn more if you go to high school and then university. You don't just go straight to university and skip all of high school. So having GPT-3.5 as an intermediate teacher was tons cheaper because you don't have to spend as much. It's a cheaper model to use, but also it got more effective outcomes. This idea of the big, strong models generating data consciously for the purpose only of training weaker, smaller models, I think is just really interesting. So Microsoft they had a phrase in here: we are working with our legal team to publicly release a diff of the weights or not. Who knows whether they will or not. But more interestingly, that 5 million data set, are they going to put that out in the open? Because if they do, a whole bunch of researchers will jump onto that to mess around with it in their open model training. Hey, last link is a video. This is a longer video editing the keynotes of Nvidia's recent launch, where they announced their big supercomputers, etc. It's worth a watch. It's a very sales-oriented sort of thing, but I think it's got some real insights in there. One of them is this idea of epochs in computing. And if you think about the big phases we've been through, and it's not Web 1, Web 2, it's zooming out beyond that, is that this AI stuff, Nvidia's, they're biased. Everyone wants their chips to train their AI models, so they're really talking it up. But I do think it's accurate. I think that we are on the cusp of a new era of computing, as significant as the launch of the PC was, or the launch of the internet was. It's a different computing paradigm, different sort of hardware needed, different software needed, different capabilities. And they also have some great footage if you like to watch machining of computing and stuff like this. But the thing which really hit me was the size of these chips.
8 Hopper GPUs. Let me show it to you. Whoosh.
Quite chunky. He can't lift it. It's big stuff. And a lot of Nvidia's stuff is around building out these big data centers and the investments. But all the AI companies are constrained on GPUs. Nvidia is making so much money because they've just got backed up orders building out these big data centers. And the stuff they're releasing is dramatically increasing the compute ability, so that the computers that they trained GPT-4 and so on, they've just leapfrogged them significantly. The hardware driving AI is going through significant efficiency and performance step changes, like accelerated Moore's law. If you add that accelerated hardware on top of all the money and energy which is going into AI stuff, I think it leads for a pretty strong argument that we've just seen the tip of the iceberg, that the abilities of the models we're seeing at the moment are a fraction of the abilities of the models we will see a year from now, 2 years from now, 5 years from now. I think it's worthwhile to be a little bit scared, to be a little bit excited, and just to pay attention and to tune into what's going to be different. So that is the AI snapshot for today. Give a like or subscribe if you want to see more of this stuff. codewithjv.com/snapshot if you want an email ping when they come out. I'm sure there'll be more interesting stuff next week. Take care all.